to remember I was looking on our flyer we had that Mark Meckler founded the Convention of States in 2013. We had the first September event that we ever had was not one speaker and dinner and a couple of, and some entertainment. You were there, weren't you? That's what I was thinking. It was all day. I brought in speakers all day. We had an entire all-day workshop. And all 17 of you that attended, I want to thank you. It was no, actually, I think Al is here. Al may be the only one in the room. No, there you go. Doris was there. Joe was there. And it was our first big fundraiser. It was out at the park. And I remember as soon as we kind of got the information out there, I had a group call me that insisted that they wanted to speak at our thing. And I said, no, we've already got people lined up. And they said, well, we're going to come and harass the Convention of States guy. And so I remember warning him, and I remember being backstage, and I said, Mark, I said, there's these guys out here that are after you. And he just looked at me and said, don't worry about that. They've been following me around. And I don't see them here tonight unless they're in disguise. So
we like them.
Okay. So anyway, but the Convention of States has been real interesting. I have said it several times that if you go into a Tea Party room or a Patriots room, there was a way to split it in half almost immediately, and that was with the Convention of States. And I saw that happen a couple of times where the room, it was like half the room said, yay, this is great, and the others said, heavens no. And I struggled with it for a while until it finally dawned on me that it's in the Constitution. And then I knew which side to stand on, because it's like in the Constitution. It's Article 5. You know, it's right after Article 4. It's right there in the Constitution. And so that's why I kind of finally came around to that. So Mark, welcome back again. I guess this is what, 10 years later?
10 years.
10 years, welcome back.
Thank you. You know, if you wonder which side is the right side to be on, I encourage you all to come up and look at this poster, because it's pretty incredible when you think. And honestly, I didn't expect this. This still overwhelms me that our endorsers include people like Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro, Governor DeSantis. I've talked to Trump about it, but he hasn't said anything publicly about it. But all these major thinkers and speakers across the country on our side who are pro Article 5 and the use of Article 5. And then if you look at the people who are against it, well, it's Soros and Common Cause and La Raza and Planned Parenthood and MoveOn.org. And for the folks who are conservatives, and I have this conversation with conservatives all the time, I'd say now it's probably down to maybe 5%, maybe 10% of conservatives are opposed. I understand why people feared it at first, but here 10 years later, I don't get it anymore. But have this conversation, and a question that I ask people who are against it, even if you don't know anything about, like literally know zero about it. Any of you could walk up to me and say this to me, Mark, I'm not going to tell you what this issue is about. I'm not going to give you any facts about it. You're not able to do any research, but I want you to decide which side you're on. On one side of the issue is, well, the late great Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, Ben Shapiro, Ron DeSantis, and the list goes on and on and on. Every nationally known conservative in the United States of America who's spoken on the subject of Convention of States, who's expressed a public opinion, is in favor of it. And on the other side of the issue, this black box issue, let's call it, is Common Cause, George Soros, La Raza, MoveOn.org, Code Pink, Daily Cause. Hillary Clinton's personally spoken out against it. The communist Senator Russ Feingold from Wisconsin just wrote a book against it. There's about to be, just so you know, a hit piece coming out from New York Magazine they've been working on for 3 months against me and Convention of States. Which side of that issue are you on? And if somebody said that to me, I'd be like, well, I'm with the first group. I don't need to know what the issue is, right? I'm with all the conservatives in America that are for this. And so I have to say, we'll start with this. If any folks in the room are skeptical of Convention of States, and I understand that, we're conservatives, we should always start skeptical. Come up and look at this poster, and I think it'll tell you which side is the right side. I want to back up a little bit, though. I want to do a little bit of history here. And I want to do first a little bit of my history. I came into politics way back in 2009. I was not a political guy. I loved politics, but more like a sport, right? You know, I had my team. They were the Republicans, they were the conservatives, and every 4 years we had the Super Bowl, and I paid really close attention to the presidential election. I came of age during the Reagan election. That was my first election where I could cast a vote. So I'm definitely a Reagan conservative. I come from that era, but I wasn't engaged at all. You know, I was raising my kids. I was running businesses. I was doing stuff that we conservatives do with our lives. I wasn't engaged in politics. And in 2009, at the end of the Bush administration, I remember they were doing the TARP bailouts. I'm old enough to remember that. They started to talk about bailing people out of mortgages. And I thought, this is really bizarre. They're going to do this stuff. It doesn't make any sense to me. They're going to take good people who paid their mortgages, good people who live conservative financial lives, they're going to make them pay the bills for people who have made bad decisions. And it didn't make any sense to me. And I remember George Bush actually said these words. He said, I am going to abandon free market principles to save the free market. And I thought, what world am I living in? That's the Republican president. And then Barack Obama became the next president, and frankly, as frustrated as I was that he won that election, all he was primarily was George Bush on steroids. The same programs, the same bailouts, the same growth in government, and then the Tea Party movement happened. The Tea Party movement happened because a guy on Rick Santelli on CNBC did a rant on television. They were asking him about these crazy bailouts, and he said, hey, this is insane, it's un-American, it's inappropriate. And I just thought, well, I believed in everything that guy said. He called for a Tea Party. Most people don't remember this. He said on the shores of Lake Michigan, he did this on February 20th, 2009. He said on July 4th, I'm going to have a Tea Party on the shores of Lake Michigan. I'm inviting every productive American to join me. And a lot of us online thought, oh, that's way too far from now. Rush Limbaugh picked this up and went viral. That was in the early days of virality, and it was all over the internet, and it was all on talk radio. We thought, we got to do something now. And there was a conference call that was held February 20th, 2009. 14, what I now consider great historic patriots joined that conference call, and they proposed that we do a Tea Party event on February 27th, 2009. Now, most people don't remember that event. It's not the big one. We did that event a week later, and 1 week later, there were 35 protests around the country. 39,000 people roughly showed up at those Tea Party events. And that changed the course of American history. But what happened was the media didn't cover it. Nobody really covered it. We knew if we were there. I did one in Sacramento. There were 150 people showed up. I was a Californian back then, and I thought, this is crazy. There's 150 sane people in California. And they all showed up. It was incredible. I remember going around and asking each and every one of them. I talked to all of them. Literally, I went to every individual person at that event, and I said, why are you here? And when I heard over and over and over the same thing, I don't know what else to do. Like, our government's completely out of control, and it doesn't matter who I vote for, they keep doing the same stuff. I don't know what else to do. So people were expressing their frustration. When we came home from that event, it totally changed the course of my life. I started having media contact me. I was networking with all the other groups in California that had held these events, and one day I had a journalist call me up, a journalist, of course we have to use air quotes. I had a journalist call me up and they said, hey, we hear you're the Tea Party organizer for California. I said, no, that's fake news. We didn't know that term back then. I was not organizing anything. I organized a little event in Sacramento, but I was just networking with everybody in California. I like people, I'm a natural networker. And so I met all these people, they said, well, everybody I'm calling is saying to talk to you. And that was just because I've been the only guy calling everybody. Well, next thing you know, they're writing news articles saying that I'm the Tea Party organizer for California. So I went from being a very private person, I'm a lawyer by training, we lived out in the country, I had a practice that I practiced at home. I didn't go out much other than to coach soccer and teach my kids to ride horses, that was about it. And all of a sudden I was a public figure. And a group of us got together nationally and decided we should try this again. We had 35 of them, 39,000 people showed up, right? We did that on 7 days' notice. What would happen if we had, say, 6 weeks' notice? And we picked April 15th, tax day, and that's where you get tax day Tea Party. about 6 weeks later, and our goal was to double the number. I mean, what if we could get 70 of these events around the country? That would be huge. And we could feel the momentum growing. So we put up a website, just a simple WordPress blog. There was no functionality on it. We gave out our email addresses if people wanted to register their tea parties. We were encouraging people, have your own tea party. Well, the first day, probably 70 registered their tea party. So we hit that double number. And then it started to pick up steam, and it was 100, and it was 150, and then the thing started to grow like wildfire. And like so many grassroots activists, I didn't intend for this to happen, right? It happened. I get people give me credit nowadays. Oh, you helped start the Tea Party group. I didn't start anything, right? I was along for the ride. It's like a surfer goes out into the ocean and surfs a beautiful wave, and then people say, well, you made a great wave. No, I didn't make a wave. I paddled real hard. That's about all I did. And so this thing started to take a life of its own, and all of a sudden, one day in my office, there was a message on our answering machine. Anybody remember answering machines? An actual answering machine. And it was somebody saying, this is Michelle Nunez, and I'm Neil Cavuto's producer. We'd love to come to your event in Sacramento. And I laughed when I heard it, and I told Patty, well, that's a crank phone call. My wife's name is Patty, and she said, no, I'm going to call that person back. What if it is? And it was Neil Cavuto's producer. And Greta Van Susteren's producer called, and she wanted to attend the event in Washington, D.C. And Glenn Beck's producer called. He was on Fox way back then, and he wanted to be at the Alamo. We're going to have an event at the Alamo. And we had Hannity's producer call, and he wanted to be at the event in Atlanta. And next thing you knew, Fox was covering it, and it was out of control, right? You guys remember those days? By the end, 3 days before the event on April 15th, so on April 12th, we closed registration. There were 850 tea parties listed, and that went on to become, historically, the largest single-day multi-city protest in world history. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? That's what the American people are capable of. So out of that, we found the Tea Party Patriots. That's why I'm so happy to be here at a Tea Party group, because these are my political roots. We founded Tea Party Patriots. That went on to grow to be the largest single umbrella Tea Party organization in the nation. I say umbrella, really important. We didn't control any of those Tea Parties. We didn't tell them what to do. We just tried to be a resource for people. We tried to coalesce resources and assets and help everybody. Again, it was about 3,200 chapters at its zenith. About 23 million people were involved. It was the largest grassroots movement in modern American history. That's incredible. And then 2010 came along, and it was an amazing, heady time. And y'all probably remember it was the largest electoral swing in the House of Representatives since 1938. You guys remember that? That was a good time, wasn't it? We threw a lot of those bums out on their butts, and I was in Washington, D.C. when they were all being sworn in, this new class, and I believed that everything was going to change. And it was incredible because that new class came in and they swept the old way aside, and everything changed, right? No, I was naive. Nothing changed. 2012, we got a Senate because they told us we had to have the Senate. We were told everything would change, and then nothing changed. And I'm going to be blunt. I'm going to say something that's uncomfortable. President Trump came in. I think he's the best president in modern American history, and I say that as a Reaganite. But the truth is, very little changed. Because if you look at Washington, D.C. today, most of what President Trump did has been erased. He did some great stuff, but what we learned is one administration does, the next administration erases. And I looked at that and I just thought, what am I doing? Like, why am I even doing this? Why would I spend my life doing this if it's that easy for the next administration to erase? Because the reality is, American politics are on a pendulum. It's always going to flip back and forth. It's not like we're going to have a run at 50 years of Republican presidents. Please, Lord. But that's not American history, right? That's not the way it works. And frankly, every administration in the history of the United States of America, with the exception of Calvin Coolidge, has grown the size, scope, and finances of the American government. Everyone. That's Washington, that's Reagan, that's Trump. So if we look at Washington, D.C., which we do, and we say this is where the big fight is, and we expect that Washington, D.C. is going to improve our situation, well, there's a saying for that. And they say, if you do the same thing over and over and you expect a different result, You might want to go visit a psychologist. It's crazy. So DC is never going to change. So do I care who wins the presidency? Absolutely do. Do I want us to increase our majority in the House? Absolutely do. We want a good Senate? Of course we want all those things. But if you pin your hopes on that, if you believe that's going to change the course of history, you're wrong. And that's just a fantasy and it's a delusion. We will get the thumb in the dike. Things will slow down. We might reverse a few things. Maybe we even reverse a lot of things. But if we lose the White House again, if we lose one of the houses or both of the houses again, it's all going to come sweeping back. And I don't know if you've noticed this about the American system of government, but it ratchets. And it seems to only ratchet one way. And that's to the left, right? And it's bigger, and it's more bureaucracy, and it's higher taxes. Once in a while you break a tooth on that ratchet and it slips back a little bit, but it's consistently in one direction. So that's a pretty dark picture of where we are in America right now. Anybody frustrated? Depressed maybe? You know, you watch the news and you think, man, this is dismal. We are at each other's throats. We hate each other, right? And I hear a lot of people say this is as bad as it's ever been in American history, the division in the United States of America. Right? People in New York hate people in Mississippi, who hate people in California, the left hates the right, Democrats hate Republicans, black hates white, gay hates straight, religious hates the secular, secular hates. I mean, it's just like we're going at each other's throats, right? Do you see that? Do you feel that in America right now? It's intense out there right now. And so things are really dark in America, and I would argue that America is coming apart at the seams. It's decoupling, it's breaking apart. Anybody feel that? So a lot of people are really worried about that. I am unique in that I think it's awesome. I'm super excited that America is coming apart. And I know that's weird, but let me explain why. America is a country that by its history has always been coming apart. It's in the nature of America as a country to be coming apart, to be ripping itself apart at the seams, and that is one of our greatest strengths. Now, it sounds weird, but let me run through a quick American history lesson. I'm working on a book on this right now called The Great Decoupling, and I want you to follow me through American history. I'm going to do a quick run through. This is a shortened version of it. If you go back before the American Revolution, the colonies hated each other. It was mostly Christian sectarianism. They all thought the colony next door were all a bunch of blasphemers. Hardly anybody traveled. Most people lived their entire life in the town in which they were born. They certainly didn't go to other colonies, and those colonies were closer to the places where the people came from than they were to each other. And then, because of an existential threat, because the king decided that he was going to tell the colonies what to do, they decided to get together, despite their differences, link arms, and fight the American Revolution. We know the result of that, an incredible result. America becomes a unified country. I think we lost our microphone here. I have a big voice, I can do it. Well, my wife calls it big mouth, I call it big mouth. Can y'all hear me in the back okay? No. I'll keep going, and when the mic comes back, we'll be good. So America continues on this course. We have the American Revolution, and out of the American Revolution comes a unified country. Except at the end of that revolution, they get together to form up, right, we've got our Articles of Confederation now. And the Articles of Confederation are a perfect form of government for people who hate each other. Because what did we say? Colony to colony, state to state, we said, no, I don't like you, I don't trust you. You people up there in Rhode Island, you're just crazy. I'm not giving you any say over what we do in my state. And so what do? We create a government that actually literally has no central authority. It is a non-functional government because we dislike and distrust each other. So it's weird. We just fought a revolution together. We're brothers in arms. But when we go back to our own colonies, we're like, yeah, those folks I fought with from Kentucky, they're crazy. We're not going to let them do anything that tells us what to do. And for 11 years we labor under that form of government, and it fails completely. And we know the story. We go into convention in 1787, and that convention, the proposition there is that we've got to fix this government. Now I'm going to correct a historical inaccuracy that's a slander on the founders that I hear all the time. 1787 was a runaway convention, right? That gathered just to fix the Articles of Confederation. That was the mandate, right? Is to amend the Articles of Confederation. This is widely believed across the United States of America, and it's totally historically inaccurate. They actually went to convention, and if you read the commissions of the commissioners who ran convention, they actually say in their commissions that the commissioners have any and all authority necessary to render the federal constitution adequate for the exigencies of the Union. Any and all. Unlimited authority. So when people tell you it was a runaway convention, I want you to be offended by that. George Washington sat up in that chair at the top, the one with the famous sun on the back of it that Ben Franklin talked about. George Washington, the indispensable man, the great patriot, I think one of the most honorable men in all of American history, the guy that refused a kingship when people said he should be king. He was dishonorable enough to ignore his charge from his state, to ignore the charge of convention. Madison, Adams, Franklin, that was a time period in American history when honor was held in such high regard that if you called me a liar, I could say, let's step outside and duel. And I could kill you for insulting my honor. That's how high honor was held. And people say, oh yeah, but all the framers of the Constitution, they all breached their obligation to their states. It's crazy. And Madison even said, if you want to know the authority of the people who were in convention, look at the commissions. Look at what the states told them to do. So that's just a little aside in history. So in that convention, the best part about that convention is so cool. I wish we had actual video. But everybody gets along perfectly. Like everybody's just the most genteel you could be. They all sip tea. There's no arguments. They love each other, right? No. They hate each other. They accuse each other of stuff. They yell at each other. There's division, big states versus small states, slave states versus free states, commercial interests in the cities versus the agricultural interests. It's crazy. 3 times it was reported that the convention almost breaks up because they can't get anything done because they disagree so vehemently. It's an incredible thing. Ben Franklin calls for prayer. He admonishes them that we were in this very hall. We called on the Almighty every day before we met during the war, and do we believe that we don't need His help anymore? And so they go to prayer because it's so bad. And what comes out of that convention, the miracle that comes out of that convention, is the finest form of government ever created by mankind for the preservation of liberty. And that form of government, specifically that federalist form of government, is specifically designed to make a country of diverse ideas and diverse faiths work together. It is a government specifically designed for people who don't like each other. Does that sound familiar? Like, that's the design of our system. Why? Because Mississippi can be Mississippi, and New York can be New York, and Texas can be, well, the best state in the country. And everybody can be with us, and then we get together for a limited number of things, the enumerated powers, 17 of them under the original Constitution. So we come out of convention, and we go to talk about this in what are called the ratification debates. Now, the best part about the ratification debates is everybody just got along really well. Pretty much everybody agreed. It was pretty easy. Is that what happened? No, man, it was incredible. Federalists versus anti-federalists. I mean, if you read the anti-federalist papers and the federalist papers, those people hated each other. They were accusing people of all kinds of horrible stuff. I mean, this is an intense debate in American history, but ultimately, by 1789, we ratify that Constitution, and that binds the country together. Now, good news is, as you're looking back in history, after 1789, everybody just got along, right? I mean, in fact, we got along so well that by the 1860s, we decided a good old civil war would be the best thing we could do. We had civil war in this country. That's how much we hated each other. And at the end of the Civil War, I mean, we are in the South, the War of Northern Aggression, if we title it correctly. At the end of the War of Northern Aggression, what happens ultimately is that we force one half of the country back into a union. That's how little we get along in this country. And you go on from the 1860s, I could do a bunch more history. There's a bunch we can fill in here, but I want to jump way forward. I want to jump forward to World War II. World War II is the first point in American history where there really is unity in the country. You know, we're out there, we're going overseas, we're fighting against fascism, totalitarianism, and everybody in the country is asked to sacrifice. It doesn't matter your socioeconomic status, it doesn't matter your race, it doesn't matter your religion. Everybody's losing family members, everybody has boys going overseas. We're all buying savings bonds, we're all recycling. The country's in it together. It's an incredible time in American history. And when we come home, when we're victorious, again, we face this existential threat, just like we did with the king. That's what caused the unity, the existential threat. We come home, and we actually are pretty unified as a country. The phrase, the American dream, comes out of that time period. 1950s, buy a house, picket fence, kids in the yard, dog, all that stuff. That's the 1950s, and everybody's chasing. Now, I don't want to paint an inaccurate picture. It wasn't perfect in the country, but it was pretty unified at that point in American history. Sometimes when I'm thinking about American history, I think about some of the great icons of American history, things like the Liberty Bell. You can all picture the Liberty Bell in your head. And one of the things that's so cool about the Liberty Bell is this big, beautiful bell. There's one in every state capital, by the way. All the states were gifted replicas of the Liberty Bell. It's got that big crack in it. And that crack happened when that bell was forged and it was relieving pressure and it cracked, right? And I think the Liberty Bell is a good analogy for the United States of America because the American experience is a big, beautiful bell, but it always has a crack in it. There's always a division in American society, and there always has been. And by the way, this is, again, why I'm pausing around, that crack is important for relieving pressure, right? That's why that bell cracked, because it had to relieve the pressure that was on that bell when it was being forged. But in the 1950s, we come home, we got all this unity, we laid a layer of paper mache over that bell, and we covered the crack, and we all felt unified. And then when you move forward from the 1950s, by the end of the 1950s, you got CBS, ABC, NBC, you've got national media, and we're all watching it. So you can be in Biloxi, Mississippi, or you could be in Manhattan, in New York, and you could be watching the same people on TV, the same television programs. And what comes with that are national brands. You can be buying the same stuff. You can be buying Borax soap, you can be buying Lucky Strike cigarettes, you can be buying those all over the country. And so that kind of makes us feel like we have a unified culture. We're all kind of in it together. I can go from Mississippi to New York at that point, and I can buy some of the same products, right? And I can hear the same news. And so we layer another layer of tissue paper over that Liberty Bell, and the crack, it gets veneered over, a little bit of veneer of unity. And you go into the 1960s. In the 1960s, we get franchising in the United States of America. This was new, late 50s, early 60s, and now you get the same food, whether you're in Biloxi, Mississippi, or you're in Manhattan, or anybody else, because the franchising spread. Hotels, food, gas, all this stuff spreading across the country. Again, that's a veneer of unity. I can actually drive from one end of the country to the other. I can shop the same stuff at the same gas station, buy the same brand of gas. I can buy my Lucky Strike cigarettes. I can wash my hands with Borax soap wherever I go. I can listen to NBC, ABC, CBS, all the way across the country. In the 50s and 60s, we get national sports leagues, Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, and we start to watch sports together nationally. And we lay another layer of veneer over the Liberty Bell. And by the 1970s, the era of big government is supreme. I'll give you a quiz here. There are people in this room old enough to remember this. Who was the champion of small government in Washington, D.C. in the 1970s? You can just shout it out if you know. No one. There was no one. In 1970, no one. Richard Nixon, I heard Nixon coming back. Nixon gave us the Department of Education and the EPA. A Republican president. Today we're like, no Republican would start a new administrative agency. Well, Nixon did. Two of the worst, right? And so that's the 1970s. And so if you go forward to today, government's got bigger and bigger, more and more bloated. And so we've got this veneer of unity. Everything should be done from Washington, D.C. because we're all the same. New Yorkers are the same as people in Mississippi, are the same as people in Texas, are the same as people in Utah, and darn it, D.C. should decide for all of us. And that's the world we live in now. But there's something that started to happen in the 1960s. In the 1960s, you have the Vietnam War, you have street protests, you have people throwing Molotov cocktails at police officers. Sounds a lot like 2020, doesn't it? The Summer of Love? Well, that's from the 1960s. Psychedelic drugs, half-naked people running through the streets, all this crazy music. And there are a lot of people, probably if I was my age now, back then I thought, man, this is crazy. What's going on in this country, right? And that didn't go away. And those people are now leading our country. And that schism has widened. And what's going on is that Liberty Bell, that paper mache, it's just paper mache, and it's tearing now. And we're seeing that big crack in the Liberty Bell. It's become visible again. And a lot of people are looking at that and going, oh my God, the Liberty Bell is cracked. And I'm thinking, this is how it's always been. This is how it is supposed to be in the United States of America. So now we live in a time, and we all agree that we live in a time that seems more divisive than ever. And I would guarantee you the country is going to come apart. It's going to continue to come apart. There is nothing that can stop this. It's a speeding train. It heads only one way, and there's no stopping this train. So the country's going to come apart. So the country comes apart. There are a couple options on how the country comes apart. We're coming to this fork in the tracks. And on one side of this fork in the tracks is civil war. And I hear people say this, by the way, mostly conservatives when I travel around. You know, there's a famous saying from the American Revolution that says the tree of liberty has to be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants from time to time. And so people will say that, like, you know, we just need a good old-fashioned civil war. And this is what I say when people say that to me. Oh, have you ever served in combat? Have you actually seen real combat? And I have not, by the way, so I'm no stolen valor here, but I know a lot of people who have. And if you say to people who served in combat, who've actually seen it, who've been face to face on the front lines with what that looks like, and you tell them we should have a civil war, they say, you're out of your freaking mind. You have no idea what you're talking about, son. You don't know what that looks like. And I would say today, in today's world, if you want to know what that looks like, look at actual video footage every day from Ukraine. You want to see what it looks like when a modern society rips itself apart? Dead children in the streets, apartments bombed out, bodies everywhere, people starving, no fuel, people freezing to death. That's what civil war looks like. So when people tell you, oh, we just need a good civil war, I'm just saying, be cautious. Now, I know, and this might be a little controversial in here, so I apologize, people talk about secession. And conceptually, I actually like the idea. I mean, Texas is a great place. Although I gotta say, here in Texas, what we just did in this last legislative session, I mean, it's better than DC, right? We're not looking at any great shakes in the Texas legislature right now. So here's the issue with secession from a practical perspective, and I'm not just talking Texas, I'm talking about all over the country. What if we say, like, the country just needs to split apart? What if we split blue versus red in this country? Well, we don't have the Mason-Dixon line to divide the country anymore. There's no north-south, there's no east-west. What do you do? Like, what do you do with a state like California, where I came from? California, by the way, is 85% red by geography. Like, look at a map of sure. It looks like Texas if you look at the red-blue map. It's just got these big blue tumors. Look at Texas. What do we do about Texas? Texas is a red state. God bless Texas, except for Houston, San Antonio, El Paso, Austin, Dallas. A bunch of big blue tumors. You know, we could secede and then we could force all the liberals to leave. That sounds pretty good. I just don't know how you do it practically on a national basis, is what I'm saying. Like, how would you divide the country, right? Like, even in states like Nebraska, which is so red, or Oklahoma is so red, you got these big blue tumors in the middle of those states. So how do you figure all that out? I think it's very difficult. I think on a national scale, completely impractical. Also, we face existential threats today, don't we? We got China. Anybody think China is an existential threat? It's an existential threat. We got the Islamo-fascists. They're an existential threat. They'd love to wipe us out. I would argue right now the greatest existential threat to America, China is involved in this. I think the Islamo-fascists is our southern border and the invasion coming from our southern border, right? And so here's what I look at that and I'm like, so if we decide we're going to have a war, and we say Texas should secede, for example, and China decides to attack Texas, I mean, we're pretty good with our firearms and all, but I don't want to face the Chinese, the CCP army on the shores of Texas. And we need each other as a country. We need national defense. We need national security. They're doing a piss poor job of it in Washington, D.C., but I think we need that. in today's world. I think we're facing the greatest existential threats we've ever faced. So remember, I did a little bit of history. When we had King George, we got together because there was an existential threat. When we had World War II, we got together because there was an existential threat. So I think this is a time when we as a country need to pull together, and it sounds really weird because I'm saying the country's coming apart. So when I went through and I thought about all this stuff, and this happened about maybe a year and a half ago, I was just thinking, wow, like it's the worst it's ever been, and then I went back and did some history, maybe not. Coming to this fork in the road, what do we do? Secession, I'm not sure. What's the solution? And I really mean this, I didn't intend this to lead to the solution that I think it leads to, but it just does, which is the only way we keep this country together, the only possible way to keep the United States of America together, to keep it from sliding into the ash bin of history, is to call a convention of states. And the reason I say that's the only way is because the only way to keep America together is to go back to federalism. To say Texas can be Texas and California can be insane. And the only way to do that is to take the power away from Washington, D.C. and give it back to the people of the states, right? So there are two ways we can do this, actually, and I hear this from some people on the right. Well, why don't we just propose the amendments through Congress? That's the way we've always done it. We got our 27 amendments that way. And I say, you're going to go to Congress and you're going to say to Congress, hey, you have too much power, you should give that back to us. How's that working? How about we say this? You spend too much money. Y'all need to just stop spending money. Why don't you pass a balanced budget amendment yourselves that will force you to stop spending money? Anybody think they're going to do that? I'm old enough to remember, by the way, there was a balanced budget amendment that proceeded through Congress, and you could watch the video footage on the floor of the United States House of Representatives when it went down in flames, and they all applauded. So if we think they're going to do this stuff for us, how about this? Let's just go to them and say, y'all have way too much power. You need to give that power back to us. How's that working? Anybody think they're going to do that? You know who says they're never going to do that? Donald Trump says they're never going to do that. Ted Cruz says they're never going to do that. Chip Roy says they're never going to do that. Nobody with half a brain in Washington, D.C. thinks that Washington, D.C. is going to balance its budget, secure its border, and give us our damn power back. And so the only way we're going to do it is if we take it back. Now, we're Texans. We know what it means to take it back, right? We're the kind of people, we got spine, we're willing to stand up, we got the gumption to go to Washington, D.C. and demand that power back. And there is a clause in Article 5 of the United States Constitution that gives us that power. This is a really important piece of this. How did that get in the Constitution in the first place? It's kind of weird if you look at all the debates in the Constitution, if you read Madison's notes, and by the way, his aren't the only notes. There are a bunch of other notes. If you want the full picture, you can read other people's notes. His are the most complete, but there's a whole bunch of people that took notes at the convention. I think that the most important date in American history, and this is going to be an odd one, y'all, is September 15th. Anybody know why? I'm really disappointed. That's my wife's birthday. To me, it's the most important one, because if I don't remember that one, I'm in big trouble. September 15th, 1787 is 2 days before the end of convention. Colonel George Mason from Virginia is there. He's one of the most outspoken people at convention. He's spoken the third most of anybody there. And he stands up 2 days before the end of convention. He says, we have a terrible problem with this Constitution. We've given the power to Congress to propose amendments, but we haven't given the same power to the people acting through the states. And he asks a very simple question. He says, are we so naive that we believe that a country, a federal government that becomes a tyranny, will ever propose amendments to restrain their own tyranny? Anybody believe that? It's interesting because Madison's notes tell us exactly what happened. I actually think they laughed because it's so ridiculous, the idea of a tyrant giving up his own power. But Madison's notes say nin com, which is a Latin abbreviation for no comment. They argued about everything. They argued about the rules for arguing. But when this idea is introduced that you and you and you and me and all of us together should have the power to overrule the federal government, there was no debate. And in fact, it's the only thing I'm aware of where there was no debate and they unanimously adopted the second clause of Article 5 into the Constitution, giving us the power when the federal government got out of control to say, that's enough, we're done. And you can do no more, and we're going to take some of that away from you. So it goes in there unanimously, and here we are today. We're almost 250 years later. Absolutely incredible we've never called an Article 5 convention. I have a vivid imagination. I like to imagine myself being there with the founders and the framers. Anybody ever wonder what that would have been like? We've been to Colonial Williamsburg a couple of times. We're going to do another simulated convention there in August. And you get to walk with some of the founders and the framers, and you get to be in the places they were. And probably one of my favorite founders is Dr. Benjamin Franklin. And one of the reasons I love Franklin so much, he was a Renaissance man, he was a scientist, he was a writer, he just did everything. He was a world traveler at a time when almost nobody traveled. And I also like him because he was just a crusty old dude. At convention, he was the oldest guy there. He was in his 80s, and back then, being in your 80s was super old, right? So he's there at convention, and so I imagine like what it would be like if I could sit down with Ben. And I imagine myself sitting in one of those old ale houses in Philadelphia or Williamsburg, and he's going to ask me, well, how's the great experiment going, Mark? And I'm going to say, well, it's a little bit out of control, Ben. I mean, they tell us what our relationship with our doctor is. They regulate the paint on our walls, the fabric in our clothing. Man, they even tell us how much our modern outhouses, which are now inside, how much water a toilet has to flush. And I imagine Ben saying, well, why do you let them do all that? I said, well, it's just a big government now. And I imagine Franklin saying, well, what about Article 5? Have y'all called the convention and tell them to cut that stuff out and limit their power? And I think I'd be a little bit embarrassed. Because I'd have to say to Ben, Ben, we just, the people who, they're afraid. And that's the argument they use, Ben, is that they're just afraid to do this. They're afraid that if you call a convention, we might lose our Constitution. He would slam his glass of ale down on the counter and say, you already lost your damn Constitution, boy. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Why don't you come back and tell me what it's like after you call an Article 5 convention? And that's exactly what we intend to do. I've been at this for almost 10 years now. I've committed my life to this. August 13th of this year will be our 10-year anniversary of Convention of States. Now, 19 states have passed the resolution. Actually, 20 if you include Kansas. Kansas passed it by a simple majority. They have a state constitutional provision that requires a larger majority. That's unconstitutional under the Supremacy Clause, so we'll have to litigate that. So we're at 20 states. We're 14 states away from calling a Convention of States. This is now the largest active grassroots organization in the nation, self-governing grassroots organization, roughly 5.3 million people. We have volunteers and representatives in every single state legislative district in the nation, every single congressional district in the legislation. We are going to get this done. Amen. We absolutely are going to get it done, because what we're going to do is, I have hope. I don't have a dark vision of the United States. I travel this country constantly. I've been in 48 states in the last couple of years. I've met with people like you in every single state, in cities you can't believe, in San Francisco, California, in Manhattan, in New York, all over the country. Every place you think of as liberal, in Boston, in Philadelphia, I've been there, and we could pack a room like that, like this, with great patriots in all of those places. I have hope, and I can tell you that I am comfortable that we are going to call a convention of states, and we are going to restore federalism in the United States of America. Are you with me on that? Now, I'm happy to take questions. It's my favorite part, but there's one last thing that I want to say to y'all, because this is an important part of where I come from on a very personal level. I told you that I'm comfortable that we're going to call a convention and we're going to restore this great republic. I'm comfortable. Can I guarantee you that? No, because there's only one who can guarantee anything, right? And that's our Lord and Savior. And I can't guarantee anything. One of my favorite stories from American history is the story of John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams, most of y'all know him as the 4th president of the United States of America, and a great president to serve his country well. And after he was president of the United States of America, he ran for Congress. Most people don't know that. And he was elected to Congress, and he served in Congress for 17 years. It's kind of incredible. I can't even imagine that. Like, you're the big kahuna, and then you're like, yeah, I'm going to go be a backbencher in Congress. He went to Congress because he was a staunch abolitionist. And he believed that slavery was a stain on the United States of America, and he was going to spend the rest of his life to remove that stain. And when he was in Congress, he earned the nickname the Hellhound of Abolition. He didn't want to talk about anything else. His colleagues hated him because he was just a difficult man. Because he wasn't concerned with other bills and other business in the country. He was concerned with one thing and one thing only, and that was abolishing slavery. In fact, he was so committed to the idea of abolishing slavery and such an annoyance that Congress passed something that they called the John Quincy Adams Censure Act. And it said that if he spoke on the floor of the House of Representatives about abolition one more time, then they would hold a 5-day censure trial and censure him. And he thought, what a great opportunity. I'm going to go speak on the floor one more time. And then he got 5 more days to speak about abolition. This is who John Quincy Adams was. John Quincy Adams died on the floor of the House of Representatives. If you go there today, you go to Statuary Hall, that used to be inside the House, you'll find a small plaque, smaller than like a dinner plate, like a dessert plate, and it marks the spot where he fell. He had a stroke in the House. They ultimately dragged him off the floor to what's now the ladies' cloakroom, and he died in there. So he served his whole life in service to a cause, and at the end of his life, he had not accomplished that cause. There was a young congressman that was serving with him in his last term there, who was so enamored. I mean, imagine you're sitting next to the president, right? This is not just any congressman. And this young congressman was so enamored with him, he followed him around, and he asked to be mentored by him. They became very close friends. It was this young congressman's first term, and he learned everything he could. What John Quincy Adams knew, taught him all this stuff. He learned everything he could learn about abolition. He learned John Quincy Adams' 3-part plan to abolition. It was just an incredible friendship developed between this very young congressman and this very senior statesman. The friendship became so close that by the time Adams died, this young congressman was asked to be one of the pallbearers, 6 pallbearers at his funeral. What an honor to be a pallbearer for a former president like that. Now, in those days, there were no primaries. The parties would decide who was going to be on the ticket, and this young congressman was asked to come home by his party. They believed in rotation in office, and the parties enforced it back then. And he said, I'm pretty good here in D.C., I like it. And they said, no, you're coming home. So he came home. Later on, he was allowed to run again, and he lost. He was allowed to run again, and he lost. He lost 2 elections in a row. He ran a 3rd time, though, and you all know who this is because it's the great emancipator, Abraham Lincoln. John Quincy Adams mentored Abraham Lincoln on abolition. And the reason that I tell you that story, and the reason that story is so important to me, is because I understand who's in charge. It's not me, it's not any of you, it's not Joe Biden, it's not Donald Trump. Only God is in charge. John Quincy Adams, shortly before he died, was approached by a reporter when he was in the House of Representatives. And the reporter said to him, Mr. Adams, with all due respect, you are a very difficult man. Nobody here really likes you. Your colleagues don't like you. We reporters don't really like you because you never say anything interesting. You're saying the same thing over and over. What's your deal? And Adams said, duty is ours. The results belong to God. And he walked away. That's what drives me. My job, your job, the job that all of you, I would argue, are doing by being here and being involved, is you're doing your duty. Duty is kind of a lost concept in the United States of America today. Duty is what you do when nobody's looking because you know it's the right thing. Duty is what you do when you don't want to do it because it's painful or ugly or dirty or whatever the reason is, and you're tired and you're frustrated and you do it anyway because you know that you carry a duty. Duty is what you do for generations to come whom you will never know. It's what you do for your children, your grandchildren, generations to come. Maybe you don't even have children, but you still do it for generations to come. That's duty. You're all doing your duty. You're all in this room tonight. A lot of you have been doing your duty for a long time. Tracy was up here. She's getting abused for doing her duty. In the next 3 or 4 days, there's going to be a major hit piece come out on me and Convention of States by New York Magazine. They've been working on it for over 3 weeks. They're literally talking to my law school professors, childhood friends, old employees of ours. I got an email about it from the reporter. She wanted to ask me a bunch of questions, but I talk to journalists, is what I say. So I'm not going to talk to her, of course. It's coming, and that's not fun, but it's all part of doing your duty. And so for me, to come to a room like this that takes me all the way back to my roots in the early days of my Tea Party experience, this is the heart of it. And you people, and a lot of you who have been doing this for a long time, have been doing your duty. And it is an honor to stand in a room with each of you. God bless you guys, and thanks for coming today.
All right, let's take some questions. Yeah, come for it.
I got the mic. I was standing.
You were in the right place at the right time.
Right place at the right time. I get the first question. Talk about the details of the Convention of States. What does it do? Exactly what will it propose? And where are the teeth in that? We can say whatever we want, but Washington is a deep swamp, and they hold a lot of cards.
Right.
Where is the teeth in this?
Okay, so 2 questions. I'll do a little bit of process first. So process is it takes 34 states to call a convention. They do that when each of the 2 houses in any given state passes a resolution. The resolution in this case, in the Convention of States resolution, calls for a discussion of 3 things. Anything that would impose term limits on Washington, D.C., that's Congress, but it's also the deep state, it's bureaucrats and staffers and judges. We call it the Fauci Amendment, right? So that's number 1. Yeah, anybody think we need term limits on DC? Number 2 is anything that would impose fiscal restraints on DC. We normally think of a balanced budget amendment, but I also think that's important that we do tax caps, spending caps. They could balance the budget by taxing us to death, right? So you need tax caps, spending caps, maybe tied to GDP or population plus inflation. Also things like making them do real accounting. Like, I don't know if you ever looked at Washington, D.C.'s accounting. I sat at the OMB one time, the Office of Management and Budget. I was sitting with a bunch of senior staff. This is kind of the height of the Tea Party movement. And so one of my friends who's an accountant, I'm a lawyer, and he told me, Washington, D.C., they don't use generally accepted accounting principles. I thought that's so weird. Like, every business has to use generally accepted accounting principles. And so I was sitting with these guys and I said, I understand y'all don't use generally accepted accounting principles here at the OMB, so what do you use? And I don't think he intended it to come across this way, but the senior guy said, we don't have any principles. I thought, no, I get that. I mean accounting principles. And they literally, it's like, I call it the unicorns and rainbow Skittles accounting principles. It's just fake. So you can impose general accepted accounting principles on DC. Finally is anything that would impose scope and jurisdictional limits. And what I mean by that is anything that would push it back towards the enumerated powers. In 1789,
Folks, please show some respect. If you need to leave early, don't say goodbye to everybody. Just get your butt up and leave, and respect our people who are asking questions and our speaker, please. Thank you.
So the last thing is anything that would impose scope and jurisdiction limits on Washington, D.C. And what that means is telling D.C., no, you can't do that anymore. And so originally, the enumerated powers, there were 17 of them. Today, there are 17 million of them, mostly granted by the federal courts, the Supreme Court. Congress takes the power, Supreme Court says it's okay. And so we can cut back on that. And very specifically means you can do things like say, no Department of Education, no EPA, no Department of Energy, no Health and Human Services, no USDA, no FDA. And you know what, the thing is, the states do all of that stuff anyway. We don't need that stuff in Washington, D.C. Texas can take care of its own environment, its own education, its own agriculture, all of that stuff, right? So that's the first one. Okay, so then the second question was, well, DC ignores everything we want anyway, and they abuse the Constitution anyway. So let's say we get those amendments, they come out of convention, it takes 26 states to pass a suggestion out of convention. It's really important. A convention is a suggesting convention. It has no power. All it can do is say, hey, we think y'all ought to look at these amendments. Those amendments go out to the states. They have to be ratified then by 38 states, which is a super majority of states. So let's say we pass some amendments. Let's say we pass an amendment. The amendment says you may not be involved in education. And the federal government just goes, whatever. We're not going to shut that down. Would they do that? And the answer is, we have a long history of this. We know what happens when we pass amendments. We have 27 amendments in American history, and largely they still follow all of them. And there's a reason they follow those amendments. By the way, you know, whether you like this or not, women still have the right to vote in America, right? That's an amendment. Just saying, I'm not saying I don't like it. Come on, it'd be nice. No, but I mean, seriously, 18-year-old vote, all of our amendments, the entire Bill of Rights. It takes about 100 years, if you look at American history, for an amendment to start to be abused and disregarded. And we have that history. Why? There's a reason. It's not magic pixie dust on the amendment. It's magic pixie dust of the amendment process. Because when you get 38 states who agree on something, well, politicians are not the stiffest of spine, and they tend to go along. In fact, what they tend to say is, well, I was the original guy that believed in that amendment. We see this play out in American history, so they will follow them, the courts will follow them. We have a very long history of that. Next question.
Hi there, my name is Davis Ford, and
Hey, Davis.
people recognize, most of you recognize me if you've been here before. I'm not from here, but I'm president of the Central Texas Tea Party. Been around almost as long as this one has. Now, our founder isn't as good looking as your founder. I've got to say that. Right.
That's a high bar, my friend.
Yes, it is. Anyway, I've been involved in politics since I was 6 years old, when my father ran against the then Democrat Speaker of the House, Billy Wayne Clayton, for state representative, and my dad lost. But anyway, he drug me around and had me, keeping my name is Ford. We put on Ford stickers on Oldsmobiles, Chevrolets, and that scared the living daylights out of a 6-year-old in Davis. But anyway, I've been going to Republican State Convention since 1988, been a delegate since '88, been on the Platform Committee, been on the Rules Committee, and back in 1996 I wrote an article that through 7 distinct miracles of God became Rule 43 of the Republican Party platform, which in a nutshell says anytime anyone runs as a Republican, you're supposed to be given a copy of the platform and asked to fill out a survey as to whether or not you agree, disagree, or you're undecided on every item in the platform. Proof in advertising. Is anybody, not in favor of that? So anyway, I give you my compliments for having a really good speech there, but I stand in stark difference to what you're trying to do here, because I think it sounds really, really good, but it's going to be really, really bad. Let me ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a precedent set to call a convention to amend the Constitution, and then once that constitutional convention is called, they throw the Constitution in the trash, right hold of the Constitution? Yes. That's exactly what the founding fathers did. We set the precedent. They set the precedent.
That's absolutely, I already proved that's factually incorrect. And look, you can go, let me ask you a question.
That's what they did.
I'll ask you a question to respond.
Please, sir.
Have you read the commissions of the commissioners to the 1787 convention that sets forth their power?
You have not.
No, I'm asking, this is fair. I'm asking a question.
No, I have not.
So you do not know, so you do
I've
not
talked to several people who have actually read those, and you're a liar. Those commissions do not say what it was.
Sir, let me just be direct with you. If we lived in honorable times, I'd call you to step outside for a duel. I'm not a liar. I've read the commissions. I can show you those commissions right now. And here's what I'm going to ask you. If the commissions don't say what I say they say, I'll pay you $1,000.
Well, there's a guy.
And you pay me $1,000 if they say what I said.
There's a guy with
Is that a deal?
$10,000 debt.
Is that a deal? No. I want to go back and forth.
You are a bully.
Is that a deal?
We're not doing this. We're not doing this.
Look.
You need to leave, and you need.
Hold on 1 second. Don't make it move. Look, this is what I'm going to say. I'm not going to call you a liar. Hold on. Hold on. I'm not going to call you a liar. Okay, hold on. I'm going to let you speak. Hold on. I'm not going to call you a liar. I'm going to call you misinformed. You haven't read the commissions yourself. What you told me is that's what some people have told you. People say all kinds of stuff. And I'm going to challenge you to read those commissions and then come back and I'll give you my card. You call me and you show me the language and show me that it's different than what I said. And I'll challenge you. See, this is what the left does. When they don't like what you say, they call you names. They call you a liar, they call you a racist, they call you a white supremacist. We as conservatives, and sir, I'm assuming you're a conservative, we as conservatives don't behave that way. We don't call each other liars, we don't call each other names. We have intellectual arguments with each other. And I'm going to challenge you to do that with me. I will give you my private contact information, and I will challenge you to have the courage of your convictions and reach out to me and show me how I'm lying about those commissions. I'm not stupid. I travel all over the country. I have all these conversations. I'd be called out everywhere if what I was saying was untrue. So I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to practice Christian grace. And I'm going to tell you, sir, that I don't think you're a liar. I think you're misinformed. And I'm going to encourage you to do your homework and come back to me. And if you'll do that, you and I will have a civil conversation, sir. Thank you.
Folks, it's 8 o'clock. I'm calling it quits, and appreciate everybody coming. By the way, next month we're going to be showing a movie in here, and I'm looking forward to that. And so we'll see you a month from now, and thank you very much. Mark, appreciate it. Thank you, sir.